She swore she would never beg him for anything again, but when the doctors said only his blood could save their son, she had to decide which would break first, her pride or her child's heart. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe for more stories, and let me know in the comments what you would do. 6 years ago, Isabella Rossi stood on the marble steps of Luca Moretti's estate and chose silence over security. The night air had smelled like rain and gunpowder, a combination she had come to associate with loving him. Behind her, the iron gates of the Moretti compound loomed tall and immovable, guarded by men who would have taken a bullet at Luca's command without hesitation. Inside those gates was power, protection, wealth beyond imagination, and danger. She had learned that last part too well. Luca stood a few steps above her, immaculate in a dark suit, his expression carved from stone. Even in the dim light, he looked untouchable, a man who commanded rooms without raising his voice. A man cities whispered about, a man enemies feared, a man she loved. "You don't walk away from me to protect me," he had said quietly that night, not angry, not pleading, just certain. "I'm not protecting you," Isabella replied, her hand resting instinctively over the slight curve of her stomach that he did not yet know about. "I'm protecting myself." It was the only lie she had ever told him. He had offered her everything, a house in her name, armed security 24 hours a day, a future where no one would dare threaten her again. And when she refused the estate, he offered money, enough to buy a new life anywhere in the world. She refused that too. "I don't want your empire, Luca," she had whispered, "and I don't want to owe you." His jaw tightened. Luca Moretti was not a man accustomed to being denied, but he had never forced her, not once. "If you walk away tonight," he told her, voice low and steady, "you don't get to call me when the world turns cold." She remembered the way her heart cracked at that, because she knew one day it might. "I won't," she said, and she kept her word. By sunrise, Isabella Rossi was gone. She changed cities, changed her number, took her mother's maiden name on paperwork that wouldn't raise suspicion. She moved into a small apartment above a bakery in a neighborhood where no one drove black SUVs and no one carried concealed weapons under tailored jackets. And then Ethan was born. The first time she held him, tiny and furious at the world, she saw Luca's eyes staring back at her. Dark, intense, unapologetically alive. She cried harder than she had the night she left. Raising Ethan alone was not easy. There were months when the rent barely cleared. Nights when she fell asleep sitting upright against his bed because he had a fever and she was too afraid to close her eyes. She worked 2 jobs at one point, mornings at a clinic reception desk, evenings bookkeeping for a local restaurant. More than once, she stared at her phone with Luca's old number memorized in her mind like a scar. He would have sent money immediately. He would have bought the entire building if she'd hinted she was struggling. He would have ensured Ethan never wanted for anything. But money from Luca Moretti was never just money. It was connection, visibility, a thread leading straight back to his world. And Isabella had not walked away just to be pulled back in. When Ethan was old enough to ask about his father, she told him a softened version of the truth. "He's important," she would say carefully. "Like a superhero?" Ethan once asked, eyes wide. She smiled at that. Something like that. But superheroes didn't have rivals who planted car bombs. They didn't negotiate peace with men who smiled while planning betrayals. They didn't live in a world where love was leverage. Isabella remembered the night everything changed, the night she realized she was pregnant. It was the same week Luca survived an assassination attempt outside a charity gala. Bullets shattered car windows. 2 of his men didn't make it home. She had watched the news replay the footage on a loop. That was the moment she decided. She wouldn't let her child grow up flinching at loud noises. She wouldn't let her son learn to read tension in a room before he learned to read books. She wouldn't allow his name to become a weakness someone could exploit. So she left before Luca ever knew Ethan existed. Not because she doubted he would love his son, but because she knew he would. And love, in Luca Moretti's world, was the most dangerous liability of all. 6 years later, Isabella still kept that promise. She never asked for help. She never took his money. She never spoke his name out loud. Until the day the doctors said she might have to. The call came at 11:17 a.m. Isabella almost didn't answer. She was in the middle of reconciling invoices at the clinic, her desk scattered with patient files and half-drunk coffee gone cold. The number flashing on her phone was unfamiliar, local, but not saved. Something in her chest tightened anyway. Hello? Is this Ms. Isabella Rossi? The voice on the other end was controlled, professional. Too professional. Yes. This is St. Mary's Elementary. Your son, Ethan. He collapsed during recess. An ambulance is on the way. For a moment, the world didn't tilt. It didn't spin. It simply went silent. Collapsed? She repeated, as if the word might rearrange itself into something less catastrophic. He became dizzy, then fainted. He's conscious now, but disoriented. The paramedics insisted on transporting him to Memorial Hospital as a precaution. Precaution. Isabella was already on her feet, keys clutched in her hand, her heart slamming so violently she felt it in her throat. She didn't remember telling her supervisor she was leaving. She didn't remember the drive. Only red lights she ran and prayers she hadn't spoken in years. When she reached the emergency department, Ethan was small in the hospital bed. Too small. His dark hair was damp with sweat. His skin looked pale. Not the ordinary childhood pale from missing a little son, but something almost translucent. A nurse was adjusting an IV line in his arm, while machines hummed softly around him. "Mom," Ethan murmured when he saw her, trying to smile. She was at his side in seconds, brushing his hair back, pressing her lips to his forehead. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." He was warm. Too warm. The doctor arrived shortly after, a woman in her early 40s with steady eyes and a folder clutched against her chest. She introduced herself as Dr. Patel and asked Isabella to step into the hallway. That was when the fear became real. Inside the consultation room, the fluorescent lights felt harsh, clinical, unforgiving. "We've run preliminary blood tests," Dr. Patel began gently. "Ethan's hemoglobin levels are dangerously low. There are markers that suggest a genetic blood disorder." Isabella blinked. Genetic? Yes. We suspect a rare condition affecting his bone marrow's ability to produce healthy blood cells. We're sending additional tests to confirm, but based on what we're seeing, the doctor paused, choosing her words carefully. This isn't something that developed overnight. Isabella's mind scrambled backward through the last few years. The frequent fatigue, the bruises that appeared too easily, the colds that lingered longer than they should have. "I thought he just had a weak immune system," she whispered. "This isn't your fault," Dr. Patel said immediately. "These disorders are often inherited. No one could have predicted this without specific screening." Inherited, the word echoed. Isabella felt her hands go cold. "What does this mean?" she asked, forcing herself to stay upright. "Tell me what it means." "It means Ethan will likely require a bone marrow transplant," Dr. Patel said softly. "Possibly a full stem cell transplant, and soon." The air left Isabella's lungs. "How soon?" "We're already consulting the transplant team. The condition appears aggressive. We don't have months. We may not even have many weeks." The room seemed to shrink. "There are donor registries," Isabella said quickly, grasping at logic. "We can test those, right? There are thousands of donors." "Yes," the doctor nodded. "And we will. But statistically, the highest probability of a match comes from a biological parent or sibling." Isabella swallowed hard. "I'm his only parent." Dr. Patel hesitated, not accusing, not prying, just careful. "Then we will begin with you immediately. We'll test your compatibility today." The blood draw happened within the hour. Isabella sat in a chair beside Ethan's bed, pretending to be calm while tubes filled with her blood. Ethan dozed intermittently, waking to ask if he could still go to his friend Noah's birthday party next week. "Of course you can," she told him, smiling with a steadiness she didn't feel. By evening, the preliminary compatibility results returned. Dr. Patel's expression said everything before her mouth did. "You're not a match." The words landed like a physical blow. "Not even partially?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking despite her effort. "I'm so sorry." The doctor continued explaining options: extended donor registry searches, potential half-matches, experimental protocols, but Isabella barely heard them. Because there was one option she hadn't mentioned, one that hovered between them like an unspoken accusation. "Is there anyone else biologically related to Ethan?" Dr. Patel asked gently. Isabella stared at the floor. 6 years of silence pressed against her chest. 6 years of protecting him from a world built on power and violence. 6 years of refusing help. "There is," she finally whispered. Dr. Patel nodded, professional but firm. "Then we need to test him immediately. If he's a match, it could significantly increase Ethan's survival chances." Survival. The word tasted like metal. Back in Ethan's room, Isabella watched her son sleep, machines blinking softly in the dim light. His lashes cast shadows against pale cheeks. His small hand twitched occasionally, as if chasing dreams. He looked so innocent, so unaware that his life now balanced on a decision she swore she would never make. She stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, pulling her phone from her bag with trembling fingers. She hadn't saved his number. She hadn't needed to. Luca Moretti's number was etched into her memory like a vow. Her thumb hovered over the screen. 6 years ago, she promised she would never call him. Tonight, her son's heartbeat depended on breaking that promise. The hallway outside Ethan's room smelled like antiseptic and quiet fear. Isabella hadn't moved in 10 minutes. She stood with her back against the cool hospital wall, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she could physically hold her world together. Through the small window in the door, she could see Ethan sleeping, an IV taped to his arm, his chest rising and falling in fragile rhythm. Not a match. The words replayed in her mind with cruel precision. Dr. Patel approached again, slower this time, as if she understood that every additional sentence would feel like another weight placed on Isabella's chest. "I know this is overwhelming," the doctor said softly, "but we need to discuss next steps." Isabella nodded once. She had learned how to do that over the years, nod while something inside her fractured. They moved into the consultation room again. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "We've expedited the registry search," Dr. Patel explained, opening a digital chart on the tablet in her hands. "But Ethan's markers are very specific. It could take time to find an unrelated donor with a compatible profile." "How much time?" Isabella asked. "That's difficult to predict. Weeks, possibly months." "We don't have months," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel met her eyes. "No, we don't." Silence settled between them. Not cold, not distant, but heavy. "Statistically," the doctor continued carefully, "a biological parent has the highest probability of being a strong match, roughly a 50% chance." Isabella swallowed. "You've already tested me." "Yes." "And siblings?" "Does Ethan have any?" The question landed gently, but it cut all the same. "No," Isabella said quickly. "He doesn't." There was a pause, not judgmental, simply clinical. "Then we need to test his father." The word echoed. Father. For 6 years, Isabella had carried that truth alone. Not because she doubted Luca would care. Not because she believed he would walk away. But because she knew he wouldn't. Luca Moretti loved fiercely. Completely. And in his world, that kind of love drew enemies like blood in water. She had told herself she was protecting Ethan. Now she had to face the possibility that protecting him meant bringing Luca back in. "There's no one else?" Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. We'll continue searching the registry, Dr. Patel said gently. But if his father is available, testing him immediately gives us the best chance. The strongest chance. Strongest chance. Isabella closed her eyes briefly. She saw Luca the way she had last seen him, standing tall under the estate lights, jaw tight but controlled, eyes dark with something deeper than anger. Hurt, maybe. Or betrayal. If you walk away tonight, you don't get to call me when the world turns cold. The world had never felt colder than this. What if... Isabella hesitated. What if his father doesn't know about him? Dr. Patel's expression softened further. Then this may be a difficult conversation, but medically speaking, it's necessary. And time is critical. Necessary. The word felt like a verdict. Isabella returned to Ethan's room and sat beside his bed. She traced the faint curve of his cheek with trembling fingers. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. He had Luca's profile. The same stubborn line of the jaw, the same intensity in the brows, even at 6 years old. She had spent years convincing herself that distance equaled safety, that absence equaled protection. But what if absence now equaled loss? A nurse entered quietly to adjust the IV drip. He's stable for now, she said kindly, but the transplant team will want to move quickly once a donor is identified. Once a donor is identified. There was only one person left to identify. Isabella pulled her phone from her bag again, staring at the blank screen. She hadn't blocked Luca's number. She'd simply erased it, as if deleting it from her contacts could delete the history between them. But memory didn't work that way. Neither did blood. She remembered the night she discovered she was pregnant. The fear had been immediate, yes, but so had the certainty. She had known Luca would love this child without hesitation. He would claim him, protect him, surround him with guards and bulletproof glass and layers of security no one could penetrate. And that was exactly what terrified her. Because if enemies couldn't reach Luca directly, they would reach through what he loved most. She had thought disappearing was strength. Now it felt like arrogance. Ethan shifted again, murmuring softly, "Mom?" "I'm here," she whispered instantly. He blinked up at her, eyes heavy. "Am I sick?" The question shattered something inside her. "You're going to be okay," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "The doctors are just figuring out how to make you stronger." He nodded sleepily, trusting her without question. Trusting her to fix this. Trusting her to choose correctly. After he drifted back to sleep, Isabella stepped into the hallway once more. The hospital lights cast long shadows across the polished floor. Somewhere down the corridor, a machine beeped steadily. She opened her phone. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. There was no pride left, no stubbornness, no lingering resentment, only a simple, brutal truth. She was not a match. The registry might not be fast enough. And there was only one man in the world whose blood carried the same legacy as the child lying in that hospital bed. One man whose name she had refused to say for 6 years. Luca Moretti. The truth she couldn't avoid wasn't that she needed him. It was that Ethan did. Isabella stepped outside the hospital before she allowed herself to dial. The automatic doors slid shut behind her with a soft mechanical whisper, sealing in the sterile air and the steady hum of machines that were keeping her son stable. The evening had fallen unnoticed. The sky was a deep indigo, city lights flickering against it like distant stars. Her hands were shaking. Not from the cold. From memory. She hadn't said his name out loud in 6 years. She had trained herself not to. As if silence could dull the impact. As if distance could make him smaller. It hadn't. Luca Moretti was not a man who became smaller with time. She stood beneath the hospital awning, phone clutched tightly, and closed her eyes. The number was still there. Muscle memory. Burned into her like a scar that never fully healed. She typed it before she could second-guess herself. The line rang once. Just once. Isabella. He didn't sound surprised. He didn't sound angry. He sounded exactly as he always had. Calm, controlled, aware. Her breath caught in her throat. For a second, she couldn't speak. I was beginning to wonder, Luca continued evenly, how long it would take before the world turned cold. The words hit her like a quiet accusation. This isn't about me, she managed, her voice thinner than she intended. It's not about pride. Or history. Silence stretched across the line, heavy but attentive. Then what is it about? He asked. Isabella pressed her free hand against her chest, as if steadying her own heartbeat. It's about my son. There was a subtle shift on the other end, a change so small most people wouldn't hear it. But she did. She had always been able to read him in the spaces between words. And why, Luca said slowly, are you calling me about your son? Her throat tightened. Because saying it would change everything. Because once the truth existed between them, it couldn't be taken back. She swallowed. His name is Ethan. Silence. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Silence. He's 6 years old, she continued, forcing the words out before fear could stop her. He collapsed at school today. The doctors ran tests. It's genetic, Luca. A rare blood disorder. He needs a transplant. The air felt thinner. They tested me, she whispered. I'm not a match. There it was. The truth laid bare between them. On the other end of the line, there was no explosion, no demand for explanation, no immediate anger at 6 years of absence. Only a question. How long have you known? Luca asked. Since this afternoon. That's not what I meant. Isabella closed her eyes. 6 years, she said. The silence that followed was different this time. Deeper, sharper. When Luca spoke again, his voice had lowered, not raised, and that was far more dangerous. You left while carrying my child. It wasn't a question. Yes. Why? Because someone tried to kill you, she shot back, emotion finally cracking through. Because 2 of your men died that week. Because I watched bullets shatter glass on the news and realized if I stayed, our child would grow up inside that. Our child, he repeated quietly. She felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. I thought I was protecting him. And now? Luca asked. Now their son was lying in a hospital bed with machines tracking his heartbeat. Now I need you, she said, and the words nearly broke her. The doctor said a biological parent has the highest chance of being a match. I wouldn't call you if there was another option. I wouldn't. Another pause. She expected anger, accusation, a reminder of the promise she made when she walked away. Instead, Luca asked only one thing. Which hospital? Her breath caught. Memorial. I'll be there in 20 minutes. That simple. No questions? She asked before she could stop herself. There will be time for questions, he replied. Right now, there is my son. The way he said it, not hesitating, not doubting, sent something sharp and fragile through her chest. You believe me? She whispered. I know you, Luca said. You would never lie about something like this. The certainty in his voice undid her more than anger would have. Isabella, he added, his tone steady but edged with something fierce beneath it. If he is mine, I will not let him face this alone. He is yours, she said softly. He has your eyes. Another beat of silence. Stay with him, Luca said. I'm coming. The line disconnected. Isabella lowered the phone slowly. 20 minutes! That was all the time she had before the past she buried walked through those hospital doors. Before the most powerful man she had ever known stood beside the hospital bed of a 6-year-old boy who carried his blood. She wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders, and stepped back inside. For 6 years she had protected Ethan from Luca Moretti's world. Tonight she had just invited that world in, and for the first time she wasn't sure whether that would save her son or change everything forever. The hospital corridor felt smaller than it had an hour ago. Isabella sat beside Ethan's bed, fingers laced through her son's, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The transplant team had already drawn additional labs. Machines hummed softly, indifferent to the storm gathering outside the walls. She checked the time. 19 minutes. She told herself she wouldn't look again. At exactly 21 minutes after the call, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud. There were no shouting voices or heavy boots echoing down the hall. It was quieter than that. Subtler, a ripple of awareness that passed from nurse to nurse, from orderly to receptionist. Isabella felt it before she saw him. The door at the end of the corridor opened. Luca Moretti stepped inside. He wasn't flanked by men in dark suits. There were no visible bodyguards, no intimidating formation clearing the way. He wore a simple black coat over a charcoal suit, no tie, his dark hair slightly wind-touched as if he hadn't waited for a driver. He had come alone, but alone didn't mean unnoticed. People moved instinctively out of his path, not because they recognized him from headlines, though some likely did, but because Luca carried something that bent space around him. Control, authority, quiet danger. His eyes scanned the hallway once, sharp and assessing, before landing on her. For a second, everything else disappeared. 6 years hadn't softened him. If anything, they had sharpened the edges. He looked at her like a man cataloging damage, not to accuse, not to blame, but to understand. She stood slowly. Neither of them spoke at first. There were 1,000 unsaid things between them. 6 years of silence pressing against the air. He closed the distance in a few steady steps. Up close, she saw the faint tension in his jaw, the restraint, the storm contained behind discipline. He did not reach for her. He did not ask why. He did not demand explanation. His voice, when he spoke, was low and direct. "Where is my son?" Not if. Not are you sure. My son. Isabella felt something inside her shift. She turned and gestured toward the partially closed door behind her. Room 312. Luca didn't hesitate. He walked past her and into the room. Isabella followed, heart pounding. Ethan was awake now, propped slightly upright, watching cartoons on the muted television. He looked smaller than ever against the white sheets. Luca stopped at the foot of the bed. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked. Isabella watched the moment recognition settled. Not recognition of a face he had seen before, but something deeper. The undeniable familiarity in the curve of Ethan's brow, the shape of his mouth, the quiet intensity in his gaze. Ethan noticed him. "Mom," he asked softly. "It's okay," Isabella said, stepping closer. "This is someone important." Luca moved to the side of the bed, lowering himself slightly so he wasn't towering. His movements were deliberate, controlled. "Hi," Ethan said cautiously. Luca's expression softened in a way Isabella had never seen in public, never seen in the world he ruled. "Hi," he replied. Their eyes held. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. Luca didn't look at Isabella for permission. "Luca," he said evenly. Ethan studied him for a long moment. "You look like me." The words hit like a quiet echo of destiny. A faint exhale left Luca's chest, almost a breath of disbelief. "So I've been told," he answered. Isabella felt her throat tighten. There was no anger in Luca's posture, no visible fury at being denied 6 years. Only focus, measured assessment. He turned to her then. "Has the transplant team started compatibility testing?" "They're ready," she said. "They were waiting for you." He nodded once. "Get the doctors." No hesitation. No negotiation. Within minutes, Dr. Patel entered, slightly flustered but composed. Luca listened without interruption as she explained the procedure, the risks, the urgency. His expression didn't change. "Test me," he said simply. "We will begin immediately," she replied. "And the surgery?" he asked. "If you're a match, we move as quickly as possible." He nodded again. Only then did he look back at Isabella, not accusing, not resentful. "You did what you thought was necessary," he said quietly. The statement stunned her. "That doesn't mean you were right," he added, voice steady but edged with truth. "But we will discuss that later." Later. As if there was already a future in which discussion mattered. He stepped closer to Ethan's bed. "I'm going to take a quick test," he told the boy. "Then I'll be right back." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Okay." Luca hesitated only a fraction of a second before placing his hand gently over Ethan's. The contact was brief, protective, claiming without spectacle. Then he straightened. As hospital staff guided him toward the testing wing, Isabella watched him go. He hadn't asked why she left. He hadn't asked why she hid the truth. He hadn't demanded anything. He had come alone. And the only thing he wanted to know was where his son was. For the first time in 6 years, Isabella understood something with painful clarity. She had never doubted that Luca Moretti was dangerous. She had just forgotten how fiercely he could love. The waiting was worse than the call. Isabella sat in a hard plastic chair outside the testing wing, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The hospital corridor buzzed with low conversation and distant machine alarms, but everything felt muted, like the world was holding its breath. Through the small glass panel in the lab door, she could see Luca seated while a nurse drew multiple vials of his blood. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. His gaze remained fixed forward, expression calm, almost detached. As if this were a boardroom negotiation. As if the outcome didn't determine whether his son lived. But Isabella knew him well enough to see the difference. His stillness wasn't indifference. It was control. The transplant coordinator stepped out first, clipboard pressed against her chest. Her eyes searched for Isabella. "Ms. Rossi?" Isabella stood too quickly. "Yes." "We've run the preliminary cross-match. It's strong." Strong. The word barely registered. "How strong?" Isabella asked, her voice almost breaking. The coordinator allowed herself a small, professional smile. "He's a direct match." The world didn't explode into sound. It didn't spin. It simply shifted back into place. Isabella felt her knees weaken, relief hitting so hard it almost hurt. She covered her mouth with her hand, a sob threatening to escape. Direct match. Of course he was. Across the hall, the lab door opened. Luca stepped out, adjusting the cuff of his shirt as if he had just finished a routine meeting. His eyes went immediately to Isabella. She didn't need to say it. He read the answer on her face. "They confirmed it?" he asked evenly. She nodded, tears finally spilling over. "You're a match." He absorbed that without visible triumph, without dramatic reaction. "Good," he said. Good. Not relieved, not overwhelmed, just good. The transplant surgeon joined them moments later, already speaking quickly. "Mr. Moretti, we'll need to schedule the bone marrow harvest immediately. Given Ethan's levels, we'd like to operate within the next 48 hours. Do it sooner," Luca replied. "We'll do everything possible," the surgeon assured. "There are risks to you as well. Anesthesia complications, infection, pain during recovery." "I understand." The surgeon hesitated. "I still need you to review the consent forms. It outlines potential complications and—" "Bring them." They moved into a consultation room. Papers were placed in front of Luca. Multiple pages of medical terminology, percentages, disclaimers. Isabella watched him. She half expected something. A glance in her direction, a question about legal rights, a subtle shift toward negotiation. 6 years ago, Luca Moretti had controlled empires with signatures. Now, his signature could save a life. He picked up the pen. The surgeon began summarizing key risks, professional and thorough. Luca didn't interrupt. He didn't ask about custody. He didn't ask about legal recognition. He didn't ask why she had denied him 6 years. He signed. Page after page. Without reading the fine print. Without hesitation. The final signature landed with quiet certainty. "Schedule it," he said, sliding the papers back. The surgeon nodded. "We'll prep you tonight, surgery tomorrow morning." When the medical staff left, the room felt smaller. Isabella stood near the door, unsure of what to say. "Luca," she began. He stood, rolling his shoulders slightly as if preparing for something far less invasive than surgery. "You don't have to—" He cut her off gently. "I do." There was no anger in his voice, no accusation, only fact. "He is my son," Luca said quietly. "There is no version of this where I do nothing." She searched his face for resentment. "For 6 years," she whispered. "You didn't even know he existed." "And for 6 years," he replied evenly, "you carried that alone." The words weren't cruel. They were simply true. Isabella swallowed hard. "You could demand answers right now. You could demand everything." "I could," he agreed. Silence stretched between them. "But if I survive surgery," he continued calmly, "and he does too, we will have the rest of our lives to discuss what you took from me." Her breath caught. "And if something goes wrong?" she asked, fear rising again. His eyes darkened, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. "Nothing will go wrong." It wasn't arrogance. It was intention. A nurse entered to escort Luca for preoperative testing. He paused at the doorway, then turned back toward Isabella. "How is he?" he asked. "Stable." "Take me to him." They walked together to Ethan's room. Ethan looked up as they entered, eyes curious. "You're still here," Ethan said to Luca. "I told you I would be." The simple exchange settled something invisible in the air. Luca stepped closer, studying his son openly now. "Tomorrow," he said gently, "I'm going to help make you stronger." Ethan nodded as if that was the most logical thing in the world. "Okay." Luca rested his hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder, protective, steady. Then he looked at Isabella. No anger, no demands, just resolve. Testing had confirmed what Blood already knew. He was a perfect match. And for the first time since she left him, Isabella understood something with painful clarity. Luca Moretti wasn't signing papers for power. He was signing them for love. The hospital room was dim after visiting hours. Ethan slept, small fingers curled loosely around the edge of his blanket, IV line taped carefully to his arm. The steady beep of the monitor had become a rhythm Isabella could no longer ignore. Every sound a reminder of how fragile everything was. Luca stood near the window, phone in hand, speaking in low, controlled tones. "No press," he said quietly. "No one uses my name. If it leaks, I'll know where it came from." A pause. "And double the perimeter." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Even without an entourage, his world had followed him here, in invisible layers. Isabella had noticed the subtle shift downstairs. 2 men she didn't recognize stationed near the elevators, another by the main entrance. Not obvious, not aggressive, but present. Luca turned toward her. The space between them felt crowded with history. She had been waiting for this moment all evening, the moment where the cost would finally be named. He had signed the consent forms without hesitation. He had submitted to testing without question. He had spoken to Ethan with quiet steadiness. But Luca Moretti did nothing without intention, and Isabella had taken 6 years from him. She stepped closer to the window, lowering her voice so it wouldn't carry. "You haven't asked," she said. "Asked what?" "For anything." His gaze held hers. "You expect me to?" She forced herself not to look away. "You could demand custody, legal recognition. You could take this to court and win. You could—" "Stop!" The word wasn't sharp, but it cut through her spiral. He took 1 step closer, lowering his voice even further. "Isabella, if I wanted to use this moment to punish you, I would have done it the second you said his name." Her throat tightened. "You hid him from me." "Yes." "You decided for both of us." "Yes." He studied her for a long second. "And yet," he continued evenly, "you called me." "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice." She felt frustration rise. "Don't do that. Don't make this about control. I called because Ethan needs you, not because I suddenly trust your world." "My world?" he repeated quietly. "Yes, the one where men die in parking lots, and enemies use children as leverage." His jaw flexed, not in anger at her, but at the truth in her words. "I left because I was afraid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that loving you would put him in a grave before he learned to ride a bike." Silence. Luca didn't deny it. He didn't pretend the danger didn't exist. Instead, he stepped closer to Ethan's bed and looked down at the boy sleeping between them. "You thought distance would make him untouchable," he said calmly. "Yes." "And now?" Now Ethan needed his bone marrow. Now the safest place in the world might be beside the man she ran from. "I don't know," she admitted. Luca looked back at her. She braced herself. This was it. The demand. The condition. The quiet threat disguised as protection. Instead, he said only one thing. "He's my blood." She blinked. "That's enough." The words didn't come with force. They came with certainty. "I'm not bargaining with you," he continued, voice steady. "I'm not negotiating access. I'm not leveraging surgery for signatures." She stared at him, stunned. "You don't want your name on his birth certificate?" she asked. "Yes," he said plainly. "You don't want custody?" "I want my son alive." The simplicity of it stole her breath. "I will pursue legal recognition," he added, but there was no menace in it. "Not because I want control, because if something happens to you, no one keeps me from him." Her heart skipped. "That's not revenge," he said. "That's protection." The difference mattered. "And if I say no?" she asked quietly. He held her gaze. "Then we discuss it when he's strong enough to hear us argue." A strange, almost disbelieving laugh escaped her. "You're not angry?" "I am," he admitted. The honesty startled her more than shouting would have. "I am angry that I missed his first word, his first step, his first day of school." His voice lowered. "But I'm not angry enough to risk his life proving a point." Her chest tightened. "For 6 years," he continued, "you carried the weight of protecting him from my enemies." "And now?" she asked. "Now I carry it with you." The words settled between them, not dramatic, not romanticized, a statement of fact. "You're not asking for anything?" she pressed one last time. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion at the edges of his eyes, something she had never seen in the man who ruled boardrooms and backroom deals. "I'm asking for nothing tonight," he said quietly. "Tomorrow I give what I can. After that, we figure out the rest." She searched his face for calculation. There was none. Only resolve. Only love, fierce and unyielding and terrifying in its depth. "He's my blood," Luca repeated softly, glancing at Ethan. "That's enough." For 6 years, Isabella had believed love in Luca Moretti's world came with contracts. Tonight, she realized she had been wrong. Some claims weren't about ownership. They were about belonging. And Luca wasn't demanding anything in return. He was simply showing up. By morning, the hospital no longer felt anonymous. Isabella noticed it first in the way the front desk staff whispered when Luca walked past. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just subtle shifts in posture, glances exchanged over computer screens. Luca had arrived alone the night before. He was not alone now. The transplant team had taken him for final pre-operative preparations at dawn. Ethan was being prepped on another floor. Isabella stood in the waiting area between departments, clutching a paper cup of untouched coffee, trying to steady her breathing. That was when the elevator doors opened. 2 men stepped out. Dark suits. No hospital badges. Clean haircuts. Calm eyes that scanned the space with professional indifference. They didn't look at Isabella directly. They didn't need to. They took positions, one near the corridor leading to the surgical wing, the other near the stairwell. Not blocking, not threatening. Present. 5 minutes later, 2 more arrived. And then another. No raised voices, no visible weapons, no disruption. But the air shifted. A nurse approached Isabella hesitantly. "Ms. Rossi, are those men with you?" "No," Isabella said automatically. But they were. They were with him. Her phone vibrated softly in her hand. A message from an unknown number. Perimeter secured. No unusual movement yet. She looked up instinctively, and one of the suited men gave the smallest nod. Luca hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't announced his presence. But word had traveled. It always did. In Luca Moretti's world, power moved quietly and quickly. The fact that he was spending hours inside a public hospital, vulnerable, stationary, attached to surgical prep, would not go unnoticed. And vulnerability was currency. Another message came through. 2 cars spotted circling the south lot. Handled. Handled. Isabella's stomach tightened. She had spent 6 years believing distance kept Ethan safe. Now she was watching the ripple effect of inviting Luca back in. The elevator chimed again. This time, a familiar face stepped out. Matteo Bianchi, Luca's consigliere. He walked with measured calm, hands loosely at his sides, eyes sharp and assessing. When he spotted Isabella, he approached without hesitation. "Ms. Rossi," he said politely, "Luca asked me to remain on site." "Remain?" she echoed. "He anticipated attention." "Of course he did." "He shouldn't be dealing with this right now," she murmured.
"Luca deals with everything," Matteo replied it evenly. "Especially when it concerns family."
The word felt heavier in public than it had in the quiet hospital room the night before. A nurse hurried past them, clearly unsettled by the growing presence of well-dressed men occupying corners of the waiting area. "We're keeping a low profile," Matteo assured Isabella softly. "No disruption to medical staff." "Why would there be disruption?" she asked, though she already sensed the answer. "Because rivals see opportunity," Matteo said plainly. "A powerful man in surgery, focus divided, attention elsewhere." Isabella felt cold despite the warmth of the room. "You think someone would actually—" "They won't," Matteo interrupted calmly. "Not today. Confidence, not arrogance." She watched as one of the suited men spoke quietly into an earpiece. Another stepped outside through the glass doors, scanning the parking lot with slow precision. The hospital security guard near the entrance looked both relieved and unsettled. Isabella sank into one of the waiting chairs. "This is what I was afraid of," she whispered. Matteo didn't sit. He remained standing, hands folded loosely in front of him. "And yet," he said carefully, "if Luca were not here, Ethan would not have a donor." The truth cut cleanly. Another vibration against her palm. South entrance clear, delivery truck rerouted. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Luca had stepped into vulnerability, and his world had tightened around him like armor. Across the room, 2 older women waiting for news of their own loved ones glanced nervously at the suited men. One whispered something about politicians or celebrities. They had no idea. Isabella closed her eyes briefly. 6 years ago she left because she didn't want Ethan growing up inside this tension. Now she realized something she hadn't accounted for. Danger existed whether Luca was present or not. The difference was visibility. Another suited man approached Matteo and leaned in, speaking quietly. Matteo nodded once. Then he turned to Isabella. "Someone was taking photographs from across the street. They've been dealt with." Her breath caught. Photographs of what? The surgical wing entrance. The room felt smaller. "They know he's here," she said. "Yes." "And Ethan?" "Unconfirmed." Unconfirmed. That word would have terrified her once. Now, oddly, she felt something else layered beneath the fear. Control. Luca hadn't reacted emotionally to the threat. He had anticipated it. He had moved pieces into place before anyone else finished calculating. The elevator chimed again. This time, no suits. Just a nurse stepping out with a clipboard. "Family of Ethan Rossi?" Isabella shot to her feet. "Yes." Both procedures are beginning shortly. We'll update you as soon as possible. She nodded, unable to speak. As the nurse disappeared down the hall, Isabella looked around the waiting room one more time. Quiet men in dark suits positioned strategically.
Mateo standing watch.
Phones vibrating with coded updates. No raised voices and no panic. Just controlled power occupying space. 6 years ago, she ran from this world. Today, that same world was standing guard outside her son's operating room. And for the first time, Isabella wasn't sure whether she felt fear or relief. The surgery lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of pacing. 4 hours of staring at a closed set of double doors, as if willpower alone could force them open faster. 4 hours of silence punctuated by short, controlled updates from nurses who offered careful reassurance without promises. When the surgeon finally stepped into the waiting area, mask lowered, expression tired but steady, Isabella felt her knees nearly give out. "The transplant went well," he said. "Both procedures were successful. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical, but we're optimistic." Optimistic. It wasn't certainty, but it was hope. Luca was still in recovery from the bone marrow harvest, sedated and monitored. Ethan had been moved to a specialized pediatric recovery floor, isolated, protected, closely watched. Isabella was allowed to see Ethan first. He looked fragile beneath the soft glow of hospital lighting, small body surrounded by machines and clear tubing. His skin was pale, lips dry, but his chest rose steadily. She brushed her fingers gently over his hair. "I'm here," she whispered. A nurse adjusted the IV pump and gave her a sympathetic smile. "Security's been tight," she said quietly. "Your family doesn't play around." Isabella didn't answer. Family. The word felt less theoretical now. Later that evening, once Luca was awake and stable, he insisted on being wheeled to Ethan's floor despite the discomfort etched across his face. He moved slower, paler than usual, but his gaze remained sharp. "I'm fine," he said when Isabella tried to protest. "Take me to him." They were halfway down the recovery corridor when one of the suited men at the far end straightened subtly. It was small, the kind of shift only someone trained to read rooms would notice. Luca noticed. So did Isabella. Near the corner by the nurse's station, a man stood slightly apart from the others, mid-30s, casual jacket. Baseball cap pulled low, phone raised, angled toward the hallway. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Hospitals were full of people on their phones, but this man wasn't texting. He was filming. The angle was deliberate, capturing the room numbers along the corridor. The private wing. Ethan's wing. Isabella's breath caught. Before she could say anything, one of Luca's men moved. Not aggressively, not dramatically. He simply walked up beside the man and placed a hand lightly on his wrist. "Can I help you?" the suited man asked calmly. The stranger flinched, attempting to pull back. I'm just waiting for someone." "With your camera pointed at restricted rooms?" another voice asked quietly from behind. The second guard had already blocked the exit. The man's jaw tightened. "It's a public hallway." "Not for photography," the first guard replied evenly. Luca remained still in the wheelchair, eyes dark and unreadable. Isabella felt the old fear rise, the one she thought she'd outrun 6 years ago. The stranger attempted a weak smile. "You guys security or something?" "No," the guard said softly. "We're concerned." The phone was taken smoothly from his hand. The screen lit up. Multiple photos, close-ups of room numbers, zoomed shots of the recovery wing entrance. A partial frame of Isabella walking earlier in the day. Her stomach dropped. "Delete them," the man snapped, reaching forward. The guard stepped slightly to the side, blocking him effortlessly. "Who sent you?" Mateo's voice entered the corridor like controlled thunder. He had appeared from nowhere, as he often did. The man's confidence faltered. "No one." Mateo studied him for a long moment. "You're not a journalist," he said quietly. "You're not family, and you're not lost." Silence. The hospital staff nearby pretended not to notice. Nurses suddenly found charts to organize. Orderlies turned corners. No one intervened. Because no one wanted to. The guard handed Matteo the phone. Matteo scrolled briefly, then looked at Luca. A silent exchange passed between them, the kind that didn't require words. Luca's jaw tightened slightly. "Handle it," he said calmly. 2 guards guided the man toward the stairwell. No shouting, no scene, just quiet removal. Isabella's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "They knew," she whispered. "Yes," Luca replied. "They knew you were here." "They knew I would be." Her gaze snapped to his. "You expected this?" "I expect everything," he said evenly. "Especially when I'm visible." The corridor felt colder now. Closer. "This is what I was afraid of," she said, her voice trembling. "This is why I left." "And if I wasn't here?" he asked calmly. She didn't answer, because the truth had shifted. If Luca hadn't been here, there would have been no guards, no quiet interception, no perimeter control. The man with the camera would have walked out unnoticed, and Ethan's room number would now be circulating somewhere far darker than this hallway. Matteo returned minutes later. "Phone wiped," he said. "He won't be back." "Who?" Isabella asked. Matteo hesitated only a fraction of a second. "Rinaldi's people are restless," he said carefully. "They've been looking for leverage." Leverage? The word sliced cleanly. Isabella looked toward Ethan's room. Her son lay behind that door. Not an empire. Not a negotiation. A child. The danger she once feared wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't distant. It was standing in the hallway with a camera. And it had been stopped only because Luca's world had moved faster. Luca turned his wheelchair slightly toward Ethan's door. "This is not new," he said quietly. "What's new is that I won't let you face it alone." For the first time since the man with the camera had been intercepted, Isabella's fear shifted into something else. Not comfort, not peace, but understanding. She hadn't escaped danger 6 years ago. She had only faced it without armor. Tonight, she was seeing the truth clearly. The world she ran from was real, and it was closer than she ever wanted. But so was the man willing to stand between it and their son. The hospital quieted after midnight. The corridor lights dimmed to a softer glow, footsteps becoming less frequent, conversations reduced to whispers. Ethan slept under careful monitoring, his small body still fighting to accept the transplant that now pulsed through him. Luca had refused to return to his own recovery room. Despite the soreness in his bones and the pale tension beneath his skin, he sat in a chair near Ethan's bed, one arm resting along the rail as if proximity alone could reinforce protection. Isabella stood by the window, watching the reflection of the two of them in the glass. For the first time in years, they were in the same room without anger driving the distance. Just history. "You should be resting," she said quietly. "I am resting." "You had surgery." So did he. She didn't argue with that. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things unsaid. She had avoided this conversation for 6 years. Now there was no room left to hide it. "You asked why," she said softly. Luca didn't look at her immediately. His gaze remained on Ethan. "Yes." She drew in a slow breath. It wasn't just fear. It wasn't just the headlines or the rumors. He finally turned his head slightly, listening without interruption. "It was the gala," she continued. "The night someone tried to kill you." His expression didn't change. "I was inside when it happened," she said. "I heard the first shot before anyone else reacted. I remember the sound of glass breaking, people screaming, your men pushing me to the floor." Her fingers tightened against the window frame. "I saw the blood in the parking lot afterward. I saw one of your guards." Her voice faltered. He was barely older than 20. Luca's jaw tightened. "I knew then," she whispered. "I knew that loving you meant accepting that violence would always be part of our lives." "It is," he said calmly. "I was pregnant that night," she admitted. The words seemed to still the air. His gaze snapped fully to her now. "I hadn't told you yet," she said. "I was going to. I had the appointment card in my purse." She could still picture it, folded paper stained faintly with rain. When the shooting happened, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just about me anymore. He stood slowly, despite the discomfort, closing the distance between them. "You decided I was the threat," he said quietly. "I decided your enemies were." "That's the same thing." She shook her head. "No, you are disciplined, calculated, but they aren't. And if they couldn't reach you, they would reach through what you loved." His silence confirmed she wasn't wrong. "There was another incident," she continued. 3 days later, a car followed me home from the clinic. I didn't tell you because I knew what you would do." "What would I do?" he asked. "You would start a war." A faint, almost humorless exhale left him. "They turned off after 3 blocks, she said. "Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was paranoia. But I realized something in that moment." She looked at Ethan. "If our child grew up with your name, with your protection, he would also grow up as a target." Luca's voice lowered. "He already is." She flinched. "That man in the hallway today," he continued. "That wasn't random. You think disappearing erased him from my bloodline? It didn't." Her chest tightened. "I thought anonymity would make him invisible." "It made him unguarded." The truth cut deeper than accusation ever could. "I didn't trust that you would choose differently," she said. "If it came down to your empire or us." He stepped closer. "You never asked." "You never offered to leave it," she replied softly. His eyes darkened. "Because leaving it doesn't make it disappear." Silence pressed between them. She looked down, fighting the swell of regret. "I didn't want him learning how to recognize the sound of a gun before he learned multiplication," she said. "I didn't want him watching over his shoulder in playgrounds." "And instead," Luca said evenly, "he collapsed at school without protection, without my knowledge, without backup." The words weren't cruel. They were factual. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I thought I was saving him," she whispered. "You were protecting him. The only way you knew how." She blinked, surprised by the absence of condemnation. "I was angry when you called," he admitted quietly. "Not because you needed me, but because you carried this alone." She met his gaze. "I would have left everything if you'd asked," he said. Her breath caught. "Would you?" she asked. "For you?" "Yes." His voice didn't waver. "For him," without hesitation. The certainty in his tone felt both comforting and terrifying. "You didn't give me that choice," he continued. "You decided I would choose power over family." "I saw the world you lived in," she said softly. "And you didn't see the man who loved you." That hurt more than anything else. The machines continued their steady rhythm behind them. "I didn't run because I stopped loving you," she whispered. He held her gaze. "I ran because loving you felt like condemning our child to a lifetime of violence." Luca looked at Ethan for a long moment before speaking again. "Violence finds us, whether we run or not," he said quietly. "The difference is whether we face it divided or together." The words lingered in the dim hospital light. For 6 years she had believed distance was protection. Tonight, standing between the man she loved and the child they created, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to consider. Maybe love hadn't been the danger. Maybe isolation had been. Morning came too quickly. Hospitals never truly slept, but at dawn there was a shift, a tightening of focus, a sharpening of purpose. Nurses moved with renewed energy. Surgeons reviewed charts one final time. The transplant team gathered outside Ethan's room with quiet efficiency. Isabella hadn't slept at all. She stood beside Ethan's bed as they prepared to wheel him toward surgery, brushing her fingers gently through his hair. "You're going to take a nap," she told him softly. He looked small in the oversized hospital gown, IV lines secured carefully to his arm. "Will you be here when I wake up?" he asked. Always, she whispered. Luca stood on the other side of the bed, already dressed in a hospital gown, his usual tailored precision replaced by sterile white fabric. Even stripped of his suit and authority, he carried command in the way he held himself. "I'll be nearby," Luca said calmly. Ethan looked between them, sensing something deeper without understanding it.
"Okay," he murmured.
The nurses began to move the bed. Isabella walked alongside until the doors to the surgical wing stopped her. She watched as Ethan disappeared behind them. Then she turned. Luca was already being positioned onto a separate gurney for the bone marrow harvest. He met her eyes. No fear. No hesitation. "You don't have to look at me like that," he said quietly. "Like what?" "Like I'm walking into war." She swallowed hard. "It feels like I am." He reached for her hand, not dramatically, not urgently, just steady. "This is the easiest decision I've made in years." The nurse adjusted the blanket around his shoulders.
"Mr. Moretti, we're ready."
He didn't release Isabella's hand immediately. "If anything happens," she began, panic rising unexpectedly. "It won't," he said firmly. "You can't promise that." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "If something goes wrong, Matteo takes over. You and Ethan are protected. No negotiations, no questions." Her breath caught. "Luca?" "And if something goes wrong with him," he continued, voice tightening slightly for the first time, "you make sure he knows I was there." Emotion cracked beneath the control. "He will," she whispered. A nurse gently urged the gurney forward. As Luca was wheeled toward the operating room, he didn't look back at the security stationed discreetly at every corner. He looked only at her. Then the doors closed. Time lost meaning after that. Hours blurred together in the waiting room. The steady presence of Luca's men remained, quiet but alert. Matteo stood near the windows, phone in hand, issuing low-voiced instructions that carried the weight of contingency plans. Isabella sat alone in a chair, fingers laced together so tightly her knuckles ached. She had chosen this. She had called him. And now both father and son lay under anesthesia because of her decision. The surgeon emerged first from Luca's procedure. "Bone marrow harvest was successful," he said. "He's in recovery. Some pain, but stable." Relief washed through her. Incomplete, but real. "And Ethan?" she asked immediately. "They're still working." Still working. Another hour passed, then another. Isabella paced the hallway, stopping only when a nurse gently asked her to sit. Finally, the double doors opened again. This time the lead transplant surgeon stepped forward, mask lowered, eyes tired, but clear. "It's done," he said. The words barely reached her.
"Is he?"
"The transplant was successful," the doctor continued. "The donor cells were strong. We'll monitor closely for rejection and infection, but the procedure itself went exactly as we hoped." "Exactly as we hoped." Isabella felt her knees weaken. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Can I see him?"
"In a few minutes."
She exhaled shakily. Behind her, Matteo allowed himself the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement that the most critical part was over. Luca was brought out of recovery shortly after, pale but conscious. He winced slightly as the gurney was adjusted. "How is he?" were the first words out of his mouth. "Successful," Isabella breathed. "It worked." His eyes closed briefly, not from exhaustion, but from relief too powerful to hide. "Good," he murmured. She moved closer to him. "You were calm," she said quietly. "Even when they wheeled you away." He managed a faint, tired smile. "Control is useful in business," he said. But this wasn't business. She brushed her fingers lightly over his hand.
"You gave him your blood,"
she whispered. He opened his eyes fully then, gaze steady despite the fatigue. "He already had it," he replied. The weight of that settled between them. Not just a medical procedure. Not just a transplant. A bond confirmed in sterile white rooms and signed consent forms. When they finally allowed her into Ethan's recovery room, she stepped inside slowly. He lay beneath soft lighting, oxygen cannula in place, monitors blinking steadily. But his chest rose evenly. Alive. Luca was wheeled in moments later, refusing to remain separated. He positioned himself near the bed, ignoring the discomfort etched across his face. Isabella stood between them. For 6 years, blood had been a secret. Tonight, it was salvation. The doctor had said the procedure changed everything medically, but Isabella knew something else had changed too. Not just survival odds, not just protection. A father had given his son more than marrow, he had given him proof. And some bonds, once written in blood, could never be denied again. The first 24 hours passed in cautious hope. Machines beeped steadily. Nurses moved in and out with soft efficiency. Doctors checked charts, adjusted medications, monitored for signs of rejection. Luca refused to leave the floor. Despite the ache in his bones from the harvest procedure, despite the stiffness that tightened his movements, he remained within sight of Ethan's door. A private recovery room had been arranged, discreet, controlled, but still inside the hospital walls. Isabella watched him from across the room more than once. Not the mafia boss, not the strategist. Just a man sitting upright in a chair that was clearly uncomfortable, eyes fixed on the small figure in the bed. On the second morning, Ethan stirred. It was subtle at first, a faint twitch of fingers, a small shift beneath the blanket. Isabella was on her feet instantly. "Ethan?" she whispered. His eyelids fluttered, heavy and confused. The room came back to him slowly. The machines, the soft hum of air filtration, the unfamiliar ache in his body. "Mom?" His voice was dry. "I'm here," she said, relief flooding her so fast it almost made her dizzy. He blinked again, then winced faintly. "Did I sleep long?" "A little," she smiled gently. His gaze shifted past her. He saw Luca. Luca was already standing. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his face. Hesitation. Not fear. Not uncertainty about who Ethan was. Uncertainty about how to step into this moment. Then he moved. Slowly, carefully, ignoring the protest in his muscles, Luca crossed the room and lowered himself beside the bed. Not looming, not commanding. He knelt, one knee touching the polished hospital floor. Isabella's breath caught. Ethan studied him, still waking fully. "You came back," Ethan said softly. "I said I would," Luca replied. His voice wasn't the controlled tone he used in meetings. It was lower, rougher, honest. Ethan looked down at his own arm, at the bandages, the IV lines. "Did it work?" he asked. Luca glanced briefly at Isabella, then back at his son. "It did." Ethan nodded slowly, processing that. "You helped," he said, almost as a statement of fact. Luca didn't deny it. "Yes." There was no dramatic reveal, no long explanation about bloodlines or biology. Just truth. Ethan looked at him again, longer this time. "You stayed," he said. The words weren't complex, but they carried weight. For 6 years, Luca hadn't been there. For the surgery, for the fear, for the waiting. But he was here now. "I'm not going anywhere," Luca said quietly. Isabella felt something shift inside her. For days, she had braced for control, for legal papers, for a demand framed as protection. Instead, she watched a man kneeling beside a hospital bed, speaking softly to a child who shared his eyes. Ethan hesitated. "Are you my dad?" he asked. The room stilled. Isabella's heart slammed against her ribs. Luca didn't look at her for permission this time. He looked only at Ethan. "Yes," he said. Not cautiously, not defensively. Simply yes. Ethan absorbed that without drama. Children often did. They accepted truth more easily than adults. "Oh," he murmured. A beat of silence. "Okay." Luca let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Okay," he repeated faintly. Ethan nodded, eyelids already growing heavy again. "Will you come to my soccer games?" The question hit harder than any accusation ever could. Luca swallowed once. "I won't miss another day," he said. The promise didn't echo through the room loudly. It didn't need to. It landed steady and unshakable. Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer. His eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling him back under. But his small hand reached outward instinctively. Luca took it, carefully, as if holding something both powerful and fragile at once. Isabella watched the contact, the simple intertwining of fingers, and felt the final wall inside her begin to crumble. She had spent 6 years pushing this man away in the name of safety. 6 years building distance so thick she believed it was protection. Now she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. Luca wasn't asking to reclaim power. He wasn't demanding to rewrite the past. He was choosing to stay. He rose slowly from his kneeling position, wincing slightly but ignoring it. When he looked at Isabella, there was no triumph in his expression, only quiet determination. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said softly. "Not about us. Not about the future." She searched his face. "I'm not taking him from you," he continued. "I'm standing with you." Standing with. Not over, not against. With. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they didn't come from fear. "You really won't miss another day?" she asked. He stepped closer. "No." For the first time since she left him, she didn't step back. She didn't build distance. She didn't brace for impact. Instead, she nodded. "Then stay." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was permission. Luca moved to the chair beside Ethan's bed and sat down. Not as a visitor. Not as a temporary guardian. But as a father. And this time, Isabella didn't push him away. This time she let him stay.